Alright, thanks for tuning in. What I wanted to do now is start by reviewing a little bit about the rules that come in the basic game. They are also called La Petite Armee. These rules, the first version was written back about the same time I started developing the game, which would have been around 2000. They've gone through some updates. Most of the updates have to do with explanations of situations, clarifications of the rules, a few changes, but the core systems have stayed the same since I wrote the rules back in about 2001-2002. Version 4.1 is the most recent version. It's the one that's in production right now. So I have those available if somebody needs a physical copy. But it's my plan to post a PDF or a Word document online that will have the basic rules, so you can go ahead and download them that way if you want to, and you only have to order the rules if you want a hard copy of them. La Petite Armee is not a particularly difficult set of rules. The entire rule book is only 42 pages long, and that includes 7 or 8 pages of army lists and suggestions on how to play the game. So it's a fairly simple game to learn, and it focuses on command and control. You get, in addition to the basic rules, you also get 3 cards that come with it. You get a front and back cheat sheet, which covers all the basic tables you're going to need to play the game. This is for if you're playing 4.1. If you're playing 4.2, then you'll start out with this. This is the addendum that shows the new mounting system, some changes to the combat potential table, some additional or changed rules, front and back on that. And you'll receive a 4.2 cheat sheet, so you've got that, quick reference card, so you've got that available as well with the new tables on it. Then you get into the rules themselves. As I said, it's a fairly simple game. I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail. Obviously if you want the rules, the game, you're going to go ahead and buy it yourself. So I'm just going to go through it fairly quickly. First thing, it starts out with an introduction. I like to put in there a little bit of my philosophy on how I wrote the rules so that you can see that. Then you get into, there's a table of contents. In addition to the table of contents, there's a list of illustrations, a list of tables, and a list of examples, so you have a way to find those things pretty quickly. Then you get into the first chapter, first section, which is called Game Basics and Setup. This covers how the troops are mounted and how to set up a game for play and what to do when the battle's over. So in the game basics, we start out with scales, which includes the ratio of figures to actual troops on the battlefield, in addition to ground scale. It has a list of requirements you need to play the game. Everything is included in the basic game, of course, but I put it there in case you're starting from scratch. There's some definition of terms, including some very important terms that players need to know. Then you move into troop mounting, showing you how the troop should look. Now this is the 4.1 version. The 4.2 version is on the cheat sheet or the addendum that I gave you. It also covers troop types. I wanted to keep the number of troops types down to a minimum, so there's only 4 of infantry, 4 of cavalry, and then the different types of artillery. And basically it's elite infantry, light infantry, line infantry, and conscripts. For the cavalry it's elite, then heavy and light cavalry, and conscript cavalry. The next section is going to get into the different brigade formations. Again, those brigade formations are for 4.1. 4.2 is a little bit different. And what I'm going to do at the end of this section is I'm going to go ahead and show you how the brigade setup works and an example of what my thinking was and why I wanted a brigade as a maneuver unit that still looks and acts sort of like a battalion. Nowadays, most brigades are single stands. They're little dioramas, but they don't change frontage. I don't like that, so I wanted to go ahead and discuss that a little bit. So that'll be in the section at the end. All right, so the next thing we're going to get into, it gets into how to determine the attacker and defender if you're fighting a one-off battle. Obviously, if you're doing a historical battle, that's going to be determined by the historical scenario. There's a section on how to set up the battlefield. It covers how much terrain goes on the board, how the terrain is placed. Some of it's random, some of it's chosen by the different players. It talks about objective markers that are provided in the game that represent line of communications or depots. It talks about how you deploy your army. what your deployment area is on the board, and how you divide your army up into your onboard force and then a possibility of a reserve or a flank march or even both. It also talks about line of sight, so you understand when you're putting your troops out on the board how far they can see enemy troops. It does also talk about deployment counters. This is a game that uses hidden deployment. Everything that's on the board is going to be represented by deployment counters at first. Some of them will be real, representing your units. Some of them will be dummies. As you move, there's rules on how the deployment counters are used for scouting, how units are revealed as they come within range of each other. Then it talks in more detail about how the reserves work. If you want to set up part of your army off-board as a reserve, it's covered there, and also how flank marches work. Flank marches can be put up on just one flank, but it covers how those are set up, how those are organized, and how you get them on the board. It also covers how to contest a flank march. If both sides have a flank march on the same flank, there's basically going to be an off-board battle as those two forces sort of meet each other and fight, and then based on the result of that, one or both of the units, one unit will come on board and the other unit will have to withdraw, but that's covered in the rules as well. There are rules about game length based on season. There are rules covering weather, also based on season and the roll of a die. There are rules on how you mark casualties. This game uses casualty caps, so it talks about how casualties are marked. It also talks about the breakpoints that are used for these armies. We often ask our troops to do a lot more than they really will. In this game, when a unit loses a certain number of figures, usually about half its strength, it's just going to go away. It's going to withdraw, be removed from the board, and that's going to be the end of it. In addition to having breakpoints for the individual units, there's also breakpoints for armies and for corps. So once you reach an army's breakpoint, it withdraws off the board. A corps will start to withdraw, although with a multi-corps army you have to break everything. It talks about victory conditions, how you generate points, determine who wins and who loses the battle, and then it also covers, finally, how to do it if it's a two-day battle. If you start a game late in the day and you don't reach a resolution on the first day, then it talks about how to set it up for the second day, how many troops you recover during the night, what happens to off-board reserves and flank marches if they haven't already deployed, things like that. So that's all covered in the first section of the rules. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes here to talk about brigade formations that I've chosen to use and why. I learned to play this game back in the 70s. I played a set of rules where the maneuver elements were battalions. They formed line, column, square, and that's the way I think a battlefield is supposed to look. The type of game I prefer is greatly impacted by memories of the games that I played before. So, why do I worry about brigades being able to assume different formations? Nowadays, most rule sets where brigades are the maneuver element, you have a single stand that might have quite a few figures on them. Some of the figures might be shown in battalions, some in line, it might be shown in columns, some might be in line, some might be skirmish. You might have a leader on it. The terrain is going to be deployed on the board. It's basically a miniature diorama. It looks really good. My problem with that is the brigade frontage never changes. And frontage is important. It's important at all levels of combat, from division even down to platoons. And I know this in part because of my reading of history, but also because I spent some time in the military, in the infantry, and a platoon forms columns and lines just like battalions and companies do, and for much the same reason. The three aspects of combat that frontage most affects in the Napoleonic period is command and control, firepower or combat potential, and vulnerability. So let's start with a column of march. An LPA column of march is 4 stands, one behind the other. Now in LPA, I assume that each stand represents about a battalion of 540 men. So for illustration purposes, let's make each battalion 2 stands so that we can get a better sense of what we're looking at. Column of march is almost always used in road movement because it's a very narrow frontage, 4, 6, maybe 8 men wide, moving along a road, and your only concern is movement. Generally speaking, you don't have to concern yourself with combat with the enemy because you're not going to be fighting anybody while you're moving on the road. The exception to that, of course, is if you're charging across a bridge, then you have to be in column march formation. But its advantage is command and control. It can move quickly. Narrow frontage means you don't have to worry about order of your troops as much, and you can get these guys moving pretty quickly. Downsides are minimal combat potential forward and vulnerability to artillery fire especially, but also to small arms. Very vulnerable. If you were using this formation in the field, it might look a little bit different in reality. Your individual battalions might be in battalion attack columns. So if this was a French unit, as it's illustrated, it might be a formation 1 company wide, each company in line 6 companies deep, or 2 companies wide, 3 companies deep. But it's still going to be a fairly narrow formation with minimal combat potential forward, but easy command and control. It's still going to be vulnerable to artillery. The next formation that you're going to see in LPA, and the one that probably is going to be used most often, is going to be the field column or the attack column. Now, a field column is designed to still give you decent command and control. It's still a fairly narrow frontage. You have more combat potential forward, and you're not quite as vulnerable to artillery fire and small arms fire as you would be if you were in column of march. Now, at the battalion level, that might be represented by showing this. 2 battalions wide, 2 battalions deep, with the battalions in column formation. But it could also represent a formation that looks like this. You might have all of your battalions deployed into line, one behind each other. So this would be a brigade column of battalion lines. Both of them are represented by the brigade column of march, field column or attack column. The next formation we're going to look at is the brigade line, which is, as it says, just a line of stands one beside the other. What does that look like at the battalion level? It could look like this, where you have your 4 battalions all in line, or it could look like this, where you have your battalions in column formation, but the columns in line. This is a brigade line of battalion columns, or it could be some combination of the two. You might have your 2 center formations in line and your 2 outer formations still in column. This would be similar to the battalion formation or the brigade formation of the mixed order. So these are all possible formations that can be represented by the line. Finally, you have the brigade square, which is formed by forming a square. And I wanted it to look this way because a Napoleonic battlefield needs to have cavalry and it needs to have infantry in square. But what does that look like at the battalion level? It's not going to be a single giant square with all the brigade troops in it. What it might look like, you might have 2 battalions in line, one supporting the other, or these could be 2 battalions in separate columns, and you're going to have 2 battalions deployed on the flanks in square. This provides excellent security from the cavalry. It still gives you decent firepower forward. You could also have 4 battalion squares. All of these formations are acceptable representations of what the brigade square looks like. What I'm trying to illustrate is that LPA does concern itself with the brigade frontage because of the impact frontage has on command and control, and therefore movement, combat potential forward, and vulnerability to fire. But it doesn't concern itself with the formation of the individual battalions. So you are commanding a corps and one level down to brigade level. Some players might find that a little too fiddly. They may just want to move blocks of troops around, and that's fine. There's a lot of different rule sets out there, so I'm certain you can find a rule set that works for you. I like the way this looks and feels on the battlefield, and that's why I chose to do it this way. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll get on to the next section.